Hello, and welcome to another 5 Good Minutes, where I answer your theological questions in 5 minutes or less. Today we're going to tackle a big question. What is the history of the Arminian and Calvinistic debate? This is a question that has divided churches and Christians for a long time. However, it's important to dig deep into church history to know where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. This debate is still a common debate among churches and Christians today, and it's important to understand where you fall. From the beginning, let me say, as many of you already know, I am a Reformed Baptist. And yes, I adhere to Calvinistic soteriology, also known as the doctrines of grace, the 5 points of Calvinism. So how did this all begin? This debate among predestination and election is one that is so controversial and driven by much emotion. This all started, of course, with the teachings of John Calvin, the French and Swiss reformer. On the heels of the beginnings of the Protestant Reformation, many of the reformers were beginning to recover doctrines that had been lost for centuries due to Roman Catholic influence. In the Reformation, they returned to the biblical teachings that Augustine had taught in the 4th century, dealing with God's sovereignty, glory, grace, and, of course, predestination. John Calvin preached on these things, and his teachings became widely popular through his Institutes of the Christian Religion. As the Reformation gained more popularity throughout Europe, so did these doctrines. John Calvin was widely popular in the Netherlands, and Calvinism defined largely the doctrine of the church there. In Dutch theology, the Belgic Confession was formed, and also came the Heidelberg Catechism, which are still important to this day. After Calvin died in 1560, a man named Jacobus Arminius arose, and he attended Calvin's school in Geneva and adhered to much of Calvin's teachings. However, Arminius began to be greatly disturbed by some things, especially the Reformed teaching of God's sovereignty, which he thought undermined human responsibility and made God the author of sin. Of course, this is not what the Reformed position teaches, but Arminius could not wrap his mind around some of these doctrines, and these are the conclusions that he reached. Arminius taught about these things for many years and gained his own following. Well, he died in 1609. A year after his death in 1610, a group of 41 pastors that followed Arminius' teachings formed a formal protest against the government of Holland. And this document that they wrote is called the Remonstrance, which comes from the Latin word to protest. The signers became known as the Remonstrants, and they protested by writing down 5 articles that contradicted the doctrines taught by John Calvin. These 5 articles are conditional election, that God elects or chooses based on foreknowledge of human faith. Secondly, universal atonement, that Christ died for all people, not just for the elect. Total depravity, man is depraved, they taught, but prevenient grace, or the enabling of God to get the process started, is necessary. Resistible grace, they believe that the work and the effectual calling of the Holy Spirit can be resisted by the free will of the sinner. And of course, the last point, uncertain perseverance. As a believer has everything to do with the beginning of their salvation, so can they also walk away. And so the followers of Arminius taught that you could lose your salvation. As you can imagine, the protest in Holland by the Remonstrants was quite controversial. Therefore, since it divided many people, in 1618 the Synod of Dort was called. A synod is basically an assembly of church leaders to decide matters of doctrine, practice, and church governance, and Reformed Christians from across Europe attended. Out of the Synod of Dort, the Canons of Dort became the official response to the Remonstrant protest. And essentially, these could be summarized by the acrostic TULIP, which we will explore in a future video. It's important to know what you believe and why you believe it. And studying and learning church history helps us understand these wonderful things. However, this has been another 5 Good Minutes.